serious. What happened that time you saw the fury of a patient man? Story 1. When I was in high school, an upperclassman at my all-male student Catholic school followed a female teacher into the bathroom and tried to rape her. She screamed initially before he pulled a knife on her. The gentlest, most caring, socially awkward Latin teacher heard the scream and rushed from his classroom straight into the women's restroom. He clocked this kid across the face and dragged him out by his collar into the hall. Then, he checked on traumatized female teacher. Later, he just went back to class and continued teaching as though nothing happened. Dude knows 7 languages, has never dated anyone, and is a brilliant, always calm man. People gained a lot of respect for him after that day. He's still really weird though. Story 2. Gym class in high school. The quiet nerdy kid kept getting picked on during dodgeball. One kept hitting him with even when he was already out. The quiet kid wasn't tiny, he was about average sized, maybe a little taller than average. He eventually lost his temper, ran across the court, and literally delivered a double-handed chokeslam to the. Being a bunch of teenage boys, we all lost our cheering for him. He got suspended for 3 days, but it was reduced to 1 day in school after a bunch of us went to principal and explained the circumstances. Story 3. Back in uni, one guy I knew on greeting and small talk terms, but not much more, was known as the literal rock against the waves. Childish freshmen picked on him for being retarded et al. For ages, and he just shrugged it off. You need to imagine him as a gentle giant, 6.9-ish, and arms as thick as my thigh, but very sweet and lovable. Hobbies included caring for shelter kitties and posting reviews for oddly specific music theory books online. I eventually became friends with him and we hung out sometimes, grabbing a coffee and such. And one day, we were avidly discussing something when 3 of the childish freshmen came by and pestered him. He informed them twice that we were currently talking and they should not disturb us, please and thank you, with foreseeable success. So he just shrugged and tried to continue our talk over their pestering. Frustrated that they did not succeed, one of them resorted to the last straw of a childish bully and called his mother a. Fun fact, his mother died when he was 14, and he never fully came to terms with it. He took a deep breath, stood up, and grabbed the offender by his head, swinging him like a club at the others and kicking them into next Tuesday when they all were on the ground, before I and 2 others finally could pull him off, and he instantly calmed down. TLDR, gentle giant from uni snapped and literally beat A with another. Story 4. My dad, about a decade ago while I was in high school, we lived on a hill, and if you go down the hill it leads into the main part of town where all the shops and stuff are, and if you go up, over the other side, it's where a lot of the bars and clubs are. It's quicker to go over than around, obviously. Back then, my parents each had a car instead of sharing one and only one space in the garage, and drunk idiots were constantly damaging Mum's car. Well, one night, Dad happened to have a day-off fall on the weekend, and he could hear a group of drunk people walking up the road. His little office computer room is at the very front of the house. So he gets up, goes out the front door, and just waits near the front lawn, watching. They're being loud and pushing each other around. Mum's worried and comes to get me, because she doesn't want him to get hurt by some drunk idiot, and I go out to see what he's doing. They end up pushing each other around more, and one bumps into the car is leaning on it, and the hood of the car. Dad tells them to get away from it. They start taunting him, so he walks closer toward them, and one of the little bastards clean smashes the side mirror off while laughing at him. Dad is a 6'8" 8X basketballer, basically is just all around fucking huge and is small man bait on a normal day. Dad hit him straight in the jaw, and you could see as his jaw completely broke, Guy is immediately screaming and bawling his eyes out at the same time, while his friends pick him up and run away. Never heard from them again, or gotten any trouble for it. Dad just went back inside and watch TV. Story 5. Working in an auto parts warehouse, one of our managers was a very quiet, collected person. One particular day, some of the orders were wrong and the ordering system was malfunctioning. He calmly goes out back, starts up a forklift and rams at full speed at a huge stack of pallets. He must have thrown it in reverse and repeated this about a dozen times, raising and lowering the forks appropriately. Everyone stopped working to watch as every last pallet was destroyed. When there was only a pile of scraps left, he turned off the lift and calmly walked back in and continued working as if nothing happened. Story 6. Twice in 20 years, I've seen the fury of my very patient, docile, and kind stepdad. The first time was when some 12th graders chased my brother and cousin all the way from school to our backyard, threatening their lives with pocket knives. Stepdad calmly walked to the backyard, grabbed the big kids by their throats and lifted them up, pinning them to the fence. "Stay the away from my kids," was all he said, in a calm, teeth-biting kind of way. The kids booked it faster than I've ever seen anyone run and never bugged my brother or cousin again. Then we all went inside and made burgers. The second time was in my angsty preteen years when I called my mother A. He turned at me, and I've never been so scared in my life. This time he was right pissed and screamed at me until I was backed up against our bar counter, shielding myself with the bar stool legs. The second he backed off slightly, I booked it into my bedroom and barricaded myself in with all the furniture I could find. Didn't come out for a solid day until I got up the courage to apologize. But he's a teddy bear, normally. Story 7. I laughed. My dad has the patience of a saint. You never see him get angry or pissed off. He's quiet, calm, and so laid back. Pretty much like me. Even when we were kids, he never gave us a telling off at all. It was always Mum's job as she was strict. Anyway, we were at the dinner table and me and my siblings were all bickering, not sure about what. All of a sudden, my dad slams his fist on the table and shouts, "Shut up!" We all put out heads down in shock, as we never experienced this before. One by one, we started to giggle. Even our mum started giggling. We looking over to my dad who was looking down at his plate, and all we could see was his shoulders going up and down, and of course he just burst out laughing. I think he shocked himself that day, but no one could take it seriously. Story 8. Not the last, but a notable one. Kid at my school. Was the third tallest kid in the school, but definitely the biggest. Probably 6'6", but really overweight. A little who had bullied loads of kids for years decided to pick on him outside of history, which was on the top floor of the school. This guy is barely 5 foot tall, if that, and no one liked him. Big Kid wasn't the most popular guy in school or anything, but he wasn't a bully and was well enough liked. So 5 is there yelling at 6'6", the usual garbage, you fucking pocky scum. That kind of stuff. Everyone is pointedly ignoring him. Then he actually hits him. 6'6's head turns slowly towards him. It's like watching a golem come to life in a movie. 5 is there in standard young man boxing stance. 6'6 just reaches over, grabs him by his head and then his belt and lifts him up above his head as 5 struggles. 6'6 walks over to the spiral staircase, which goes all the way to the bottom of the school, 4 floors down. 5 realizes what is about to happen and just goes quiet. 6'6 throws him down the stairs. We all rush to watch as he tumbles down flight after flight, finally stopping, unconscious, at the feet of our deputy head, a really nice guy actually, who was just about to come up from the basement level. Deputy head gets the nurse and kid is taken away, presumably to hospital, but I don't know. He wasn't seriously injured, unbelievably, but very badly bruised. Deputy head comes up to where we are all still standing, about 20 or so of us, says, "Did anyone see what happened here?" Student, "I didn't see who." Pipes up, "5 tripped and fell down the stairs, sir." Everyone nods agreement. 6.6 was still in school a few days after, and people got expelled from our school for much less. So I guess 5 whores kept his mouth shut. The insults he was throwing would have gotten him expelled, or at least suspended too. And he'd been suspended before, so probably the former. So yeah, maybe don't pick on guys with around 4 times your body mass, even if they seem quiet. Edit. For the people saying that throwing him down the stairs was too extreme, here are a few points. 1. I'm pretty certain he didn't mean to throw him down 3 flights of stairs. Our spiral staircases were those sort of square spirals, with only about 7 steps aside. He looked as surprised as everyone when 5 feet didn't just stop at the first wall, but bounced off and kept on rolling. 2. The guy was an unrepentant. Even after this incident, which was not the first time he had been beat down, I myself knocked him on his 3 years previous after he had tormented me nonstop for a year and a half. This guy was in my form, and in the first 2 years of school that meant I had every lesson with him. I was forced to be in class with this all day. Every day. He abused me and lots of other kids, verbally and physically. He robbed people, vandalized their stuff, and generally got away with it without much more than the odd detention. Normally with whoever he was tormenting dragged along for the ride because the teachers generally didn't care, or were pricks themselves. He wouldn't stop at people from our year either. He would attack the younger kids, spit at the teachers, vandalize school property, everything. If 6'6 hadn't thrown him down the staircase, it was only a matter of minutes before someone else knocked his teeth out. Racism wasn't tolerated much in our school, by the students at least. 3. At this point, he was 15, 16 years old. We had all been through the motions. We'd reported him to teachers, which generally got either no results or got us punished for telling stories or told to man up. I, for one, had actually been taken to see the deputy head mentioned at one point after a fight. The deputy head asked me what had caused the fight, with another, different bully, and told him everything that had been happening. He had nodded his head and told me he would make sure the bullies would leave me alone. I thought this would mean they would get some kind of suspended sentence deal, like, if you bully him again, we'll suspend you. But it actually meant talking to them for like 2 minutes to the tune of, "Stop it, it's not nice." The only thing that stopped him tormenting me was a swift right hook when I happened to walk into an empty corridor and catch him coming out of the gents. Alone in the corridor with no teachers around, he looked up at me and opened his mouth to say something, and I knocked him on his giving him a nosebleed. For the record, I didn't make a quip. I didn't kick him whilst he was down, and I didn't feel good about it. I didn't tell my friends. I didn't feel I had beaten the bully. I spent the next 2 weeks in constant fear of being jumped by him and some of his friends. I didn't realize at the time he only had one and he was smaller than him and also a pretty nice guy. After a year and a half of constant harassment and physical abuse, one punch didn't really repair any of the damage. Either way, He didn't bother me hardly at all after that. This also worked with the other ones, though it almost got me expelled. But that's another story. Basically what I'm saying is, the options open to 6-6 were stand there and let a tiny bully scream abuse at him and hit him, or fight back. So yeah, if you're sitting there still thinking kids will be kids, or sure he was mean but he didn't deserve that, understand that he was back at school a few days later. A little sore but still swearing at people. I can still remember the abuse, still feel the kicks and the taunts. I was not the only kid he bullied. One kid had to leave the school. His abuse was that bad. This stuff stays with you. Edit 2. Just a quick one for the people saying 6-6 could have gone to jail for the rest of his life. Two things wrong with that statement. 1. No one except a load of people who hated 5's guts and liked Hosh felt ambivalent towards 6-6 were present, and pretty much everyone up there would have been a suspect, myself included. 2. We just saw this guy pick a guy up by his head and throw him down 3 flights of stairs. Story 9. I once was playing soccer on a local school area. After 8 p.m. the gates are closing, so we just agreed that we were going to leave after 8 p.m. because this was an honest kid, age 11. When it was like 7:59, a friend of mine kicked the ball on the roof, not on purpose, of the school. Note, this was my brand new ball, so I really wanted it back. So I climbed on the roof of the school, but this was kind of hard, so it took longer than the 1 minute I had before the gates were closing. I finally got my ball, but by this time, it already was 8:15. That's when I spotted my local police officer. I don't know the English word. A police office that only has a specif block. I know this guy because you know he's the policeman from my block. He started shouting my name that I need to get off that roof now because I was trespassing. So I panicked because a policeman was shouting at me. I climbed down the roof and the policeman told me that I was trespassing and that is against the law. I told him I just wanted my new ball and that I planned to get out of the gates after 8 p.m. But this guy was old and grumpy, so he asked for an ID card. Being 11 and in Holland, the minimal age for an ID card is software 12, 14. I didn't have an ID card, so this MF took me to the local jail. So at this point, me and 3 friends are sitting in a 2x2 jail cell. It had 144 bricks, 62 glass bricks, a metal door, and a bed. No sheets. I'll never forget those numbers. So another agent started asking questions about a series of burglaries, and we just stood there with a WTF we are 11 years old mate face. So the policeman said, well, if you're not going to talk, I guess we need to call your parents. The 4 of us were like, fuck, finally. We asked for this the first time you took us here. Well, we were crying, I won't lie. So I guess 20 minutes later, I hear some noise in the distance. An older guy yelling to an officer. We were like, who could this be? Note, I grew up in a strict Christian family. Turned out it was my father yelling at the whole stations to release us because we were just playing soccer and that those policemen were freaking stupid to think a group of 11-year-old was responsible for a series of burglaries. That was the first and last time I heard my dad say some swear words. Story 10. My dad was career Army as an officer. I have always known him as a soft-spoken, kind, never gets angry kind of person. He rarely ever raises his voice that I know of. There is a law in the US that basically protects any service member nearing 20 years from being forced out so they can get full retirement benefits. One day, he gets a call from his commanding general telling him that he is going to be forced put due to budget cuts army-wide. He got up out of his seat and started yelling at the general on the phone that it was impossible due to the law since he was in the safe zone. He started quoting section after section, yelling at the general, telling him he had fucked up and that it better be fixed. A few days later, my dad got a call again from the general, and the first thing the general said was, before you say anything, let me apologize for the other day. You were 100% correct. But budget cuts are budget cuts, and as soon as my dad hit 20 years, he was retired. Story 11. I knew a girl who was living with a guy who had a severe anger management issue. He had kept it under control for the few years they had lived together, but one day he snapped over some minor issue, hit her repeatedly, banged her face in the concrete, and tried to choke her until a passery stopped him. So, obviously, the relationship was over, and she was going to fetch her stuff from the apartment. She, likewise, obviously, didn't want to go alone, so me, 2 other friends and her brother, who I also knew, tagged along to keep things in check and to help carry stuff. When we arrive, her ex give us attitude, which causes her normally extremely mild and docile brother to snap completely. He smacked the guy up against the wall with one hand and punched him repeatedly with the other, holding him up against the wall all the time, because you don't hit someone who is down. We just stood there in shock and awe, given the way the girl looked after the beating she had received, black and blue, bruised, her entire face scraped, choke marks around the neck, and so on. We didn't mind much what was going on, and just let him punch him out. Then, we got her stuff and left as he started to wake up. 2 times during the following months, the ex was jumped twice when moving outdoors in the evening. I don't know who did it, and I don't want to know. I guess everybody has their trigger. Story 12. My Phil is such a patient man. He's quiet, reserved, has a great sense of humor when my Emil lets him get any words in. My Emil talks. A lot. She will ask you questions, and when you start to answer, she talks over you and tries to answer them herself. It's infuriating and obnoxious. One time she asked me a question, and I started to answer her, and she cut me off to basically finish my answer for me and starts to ask another question. Lather, rinse, repeat for about 4 questions. Finally, my patient, quiet, sits back and watches the world, FIL just explodes on her, basically screaming at her. Mill, oh my god, let her actually answer the question you asked. Stop interrupting. You never let anyone finish their thought. It was glorious, and I almost tackled him to hug him. She still does it, but that day was amazing. Story 13. I worked with this theater director who was well known for being one of the nicest and most intelligent people you can meet. But there was one actor in this show who was a grade A pain in the. She would constantly be late for rehearsals once she didn't show up at all. The reason was her girlfriend was in a car accident. But the problem was she didn't tell the stage manager, director, or anyone she wasn't coming. We found out through Facebook. This was a show with some deaf cast members and some hearing actors who didn't know ASL had to do some signing. So we brought in an ASL instructor. This woman, though, did know some ASL and thought she knew better than the college professor and would constantly try to correct her. We were doing spacing rehearsal in one of our touring spaces with very limited time. This is 2 months into the rehearsal process, and the director has finally had enough of her having a backhanded comment for everything. He adjusts her blocking slightly, just because the space we're in is a bit different. She starts to say something and the director just screams, "The show isn't about you, goddammit," and he throws his script to the ground so that pages fly everywhere. It's the first time any of us have ever heard him yell or curse in anger. She runs off stage crying. Then he calmly says, "Can we get back to work, please?" And then later, during a break, I overhear him talking to her about how he is going to tell everyone he knows in theater never to hire her or work with her. Story 14. My uncle is the most peaceful person I know. He's essentially a living version of what would happen if you combined Jenner Iroh, Bob Ross, and Dr. Dolittle. He keeps a garden, feeds wild birds out of the palm of his hand, has been known to just walk up to a deer without it running away. I've never heard him raise his voice except to talk to someone really far away in my entire life. He was in the military during Vietnam. Not sure what branch. He never saw a combat zone. He was the guy who fixed stuff that came back from a combat zone. The war ends. He goes home and returns to his normal life working at a tire factory. One night he's getting off of a hard day at work and wants a drink, so he goes to the local bar. 3 guys are standing outside talking amongst themselves, and he goes to walk in, but they stop him. He tells them he doesn't want any trouble. He's just had a stressful day at work and wants to grab a drink. They go back and forth for a while, and eventually he just pushes past them to get in. They didn't like that and pulled him back, where he proceeded to knock one unconscious and floor another. The third backed off and let him inside. By the time he'd left, they were nowhere to be seen. Story 15. My grandfather is a nice, funny, flirty guy. Was an exec at a manufacturing business after being the 3rd employee. Everyone gets along with him, and he was fairly well off in my small town. One day, my cousin and I are helping him with some work, and we go to the store. There is a lot of poverty in my hometown, and one of the poorer families was at the store. My cousin makes some comment, he was kind of A at this point, about them being poor, and what were they doing at the store because they couldn't buy anything or something along those lines. My nice grandfather grabs him and slams him against a wall and says, "Nothing in your life makes you better than them. Right now, I'd rather have them buy me than you." He then makes my cousin go apologize, and my grandfather announces my cousin will pay for whatever they are getting. He makes my cousin work off the expenses for him to prove a lesson, and now that cousin is a stand-up social worker, specializing in poverty, abuse, and rehabilitation. Only time I have ever seen my grandfather be aggressive. Story 16. My grandfather was a man who rarely talked and never rushed. He once had a completely silent argument with my SO. They slammed the back door at each other until they broke the window in it. That said, he was a steel worker, worker for a moving company on the weekends. He was short, but built like a brick house. When I was very young, I don't remember what led up to it, but I remember my father making my grandmother cry. Then I remember my grandfather charging in like a bull, grabbing my father and pitching him across the house. My dad made the good decision and bolted as soon as he got up. That was the one and only time I saw my grandpop lose his temper. Story 17. My dad has always been kind and fairly quiet. Not shy by any means, but certainly more of an introvert. At the time this happened, he was 6 feet tall and maybe 190 pounds. I should preface this by saying I grew up in a small town. Everyone went hunting or shooting, and gun safety was something kids were taught from a young age. We lived at the end of a T intersection, such that our house faced down the stem, hairs, of the T. At the bottom of that stem lived a dog. This dog got out a few times and terrified my sister, who was probably about 7 or 8. It also chased our cat, who climbed the exterior of our front door. When I opened the door to see what the commotion was, the cat fell on my head. Scared cats, with claws, falling on the head of a 6-year-old. Not something you'd like to experience for anyone curious. Anyway, one day the dog gets out again. My sister runs home in tears, terrified of this big dog. My dad decided enough was enough. On that hot summer day, he got himself a glass of iced tea. He put his .357 revolver in his shoulder holster and his .44 Ruger Red Hawk in his hip holster. He pulled out a lawn chair, grabbed a book, and sat in our driveway. With a clear view of the house with the dog, he waited until the owner came home. Hours passed. My mother checked on him frequently, refilling his iced tea as needed. When the guy got him, my dad walked down the street. He knocked on the guy's door and told him, quite plainly, that the next time that dog gets out, I'm going to shoot the dog, and then I'm going to shoot you. The fence was promptly fixed, and the dog never chased my sister again. Story 18. Used to work at Comcast, boo hiss, and I had aspirations to move up in the company. I was pretty green to the corporate world, so I thought that helping my supervisor with her job would help move me up. And by help, I mean my supervisor made me do her entire job. I ran her meetings, did scheduling, went through her paperwork, etc., all while she sat at her desk playing Candy Crush on her iPad. I did all this while working on the phone. I did this for months until one day I snapped on a customer. Now, I take full responsibility for what I did, but that wasn't good enough for her. Nope. She had to sit me down and humiliate me in front on the upper management. For an hour and a half, she made me listen to a recording of my entire up, while pausing it every few minutes to say something like, "How could you?" I was in tears at the end, and she just used that to show how bad of an employee I am and how good a boss she is for helping me learn from my mistakes. She then pushed for me to receive a final notice. If I went out of line one more time for a year, I'd lose my job. She wasn't going to fire me. I was going to do that for her. HR was predictably useless, as were my friends in management. Now that I had gone from being an up-and-coming star to a pariah, people didn't give a about me, except my supervisor, who still expected me to do her fucking job. My next few days were filled with a considerable amount of crying. What followed was rage. Endless, white-hot rage. I didn't quit. I didn't give up. Instead, I decided to best revenge with success. I went back to school to finish my degree. After a while, I was offered an internship, which I took. While I was fighting an uphill battle at Comcast 40 hours a week, I was at an internship 20 hours a week while being a full-time student. And I let my supervisor know this. "Sorry, boss," I'd say. "I can't do this report for you. I have a final to study for. Want me to stay late? No can do. My internship is working me hard, so I want to spend my night off at home doing nothing." This went on for that year I was on probation. And during that time, I always kept my sales numbers low. Not low enough to get fired, but just at the point where people could see I wasn't trying. This affected my commission, but it was so worth it. Why? 3 months before my probation was over, I switched to another supervisor. Those last 3 months upped my effort and my sales figures skyrocketed. Within my first month, my new supervisor saw my numbers double. I had intentionally undercut my commission to make her look bad. The upper management saw how my new supervisor succeeded in 1 month, where my older supervisor failed in 9. And it pleased me to no end that I humiliated her like how she humiliated me. On the 1-year anniversary of my probation, I put in my 2-week notice. In my exit interview, I let them know what I did with my life. I omitted the undercutting part, and that I spent the last year becoming a better person just to spite Comcast, and that I waited to quit until after my probation was over. It was glorious. Suckers. T-U-L. Dear. I fucked with Comcast for an entire year as revenge for fucking with me. Story 19. Okay, so this story is about me. I'm a very laid-back, stoic, water off a duck's back kind of guy. I was a skinny, little geeky kid with a smart mouth, but funny. I got picked on at times, but never really let it bother me. But one day I was coming home from school and there was a kid standing in the street outside of my house. As I walked up, he called out to me and asked me if I was my real name. I walked up to him and told him that was me, and then he pulled his hand out of his pocket and shoved a friggin' Swiss Army knife into my leg. I lost my cue adrenaline surge, grabbed the wrist holding the knife and twisted it until I heard bones grind and snap. Kicked him in the stomach with the leg he'd just stabbed as hard as I could, and then he doubled over. I grabbed his head and brought his face down as I brought my knee up again, same one he'd just stabbed. Broke his nose with my knee. That took him to the ground, and I kicked him in the ribs a few times. Then I just walked away, to where my dog, Bear, was straining at the end of his chain trying to get at the guy. Let the chain loose and Bear went nuts. Guy got up real quick and ran. No idea what happened after that. Bear came back about 45 minutes later. None the worse for wear. Over 20 years later now, and I still have the knife the kid dropped, a scar above my knee, and no clue who he was or why he stabbed me. By far the most surreal experience of my life. TLDR. Time traveler assassination attempt fails. Dog still fine. Story 20. Greg versus Jimmy. This one guy who was in our year at school was gigantic. We'll say his name was Greg. Greg hit 6 foot tall at the age of 15 and had a beard coming in a few years before that. He was intimidating as hell, but he was the nicest guy you'd ever meet. I still have a ton of time for him all these years later. Genuine model of a good person. Anyway, he was being teased all year by this of a boy. Let's call him Jimmy. Jimmy had some self-esteem issues and used to pick on younger kids constantly, but when he set his sights on gentle Greg, knowing he wouldn't retaliate, it got interesting. Jimmy was rarely in school but would still hang about the school gates with about 6 or 7 pals waiting for Greg to appear, then bolt when he finally did. One weekend, we were all out street drinking, as you do, and Jimmy and co jumped Greg. Greg went mental. A couple of Jimmy's pals held us back while Greg managed to knock 4 of the guys clean out before they brought him down. It was like watching the Hulk fight. Jimmy obviously bolted before the actual fighting began. The next Monday at school, he was back to his usual self again. Or so it seemed. I didn't witness the next part myself, but I wish I did. Greg hit Jimmy with an uppercut so forceful that he was launched across a school desk and was advised to leave education. Justice. Story 21. When I was in elementary school, I was being bullied at recess and the teacher saw our monitor wasn't doing anything about it. My dad didn't work a traditional office job. He made his own schedule, which let him have a lot of flexibility. After getting the runaround at the school, he was referred to some bureaucrat at the district offices. Well, this guy did not want to meet my father. So, despite my dad making an appointment, he wasn't in that day. Fun fact, that excuse doesn't work very well when you have labeled dedicated parking spots. The appointment was at 2 p.m., so my dad blocked the car in, rolled down the windows, pulled out a book, and started reading. At around 7 p.m., he hears the cough of a man who wants to get someone's attention while not being obvious about it. Oh, look at that! The bureaucrat showed up to the office and is ready for his 2 p.m. appointment. Story 22. My dad has always been very patient. I don't know how he does it. My mom is high-strung and emotional, and I was a teenage girl. He just sailed through all of this in stoic silence, mediating where necessary, but for the most part not getting involved, no matter what. Then there was the time where I was grounded from using my computer because the school thought I was trafficking with Satan. Another story for another day. Dad decided to take this as an opportunity to audit just what exactly I was doing on that computer and started going through my files. As pretty much any teenage girl would do, I saw this and freaked the out. Screamed, cried, begged, but he just kept quietly ignoring the emotional tirade and clicking. In a dead panic, I did it. I took a step forward and smacked the baseball cap right off his head in rage. The man near put me through a wall. Story 23. I didn't witness this, but my dad told me a story about his grandparents. My great-grandpa and grandma were British and came over sometimes in the 60s, I think. My great-grandpa fought in the Somme during WW1 and got captured by the Germans and held as a POW. So he had been through some. He was very quiet, generally pretty nice, but couldn't hear much. My great-grandma liked her sherry and was always nagging him and hassling him. So one day, my dad and his siblings were at my great-grandparents' house. My great-grandpa was sitting in his chair by the fire, smoking his pipe while my great-grandma was going on about something. He was generally just ignoring her when she grabbed one of those fire pokers and threw it at him. He had his hands resting on the arms of the chair, and the poker got wedged into the chair right in between his fingers. Didn't hit him, though. So my great-grandpa, quietly and unfazed, got up, pulled the poker out, and put it back in its place. Then sat back down and said, "We won't be doing that again now, will we?" Apparently, my great-grandma was just petrified, because he never said anything remotely confrontational. Story 24. My father is a lawyer who only takes work and finance cases, like someone who was fired unfairly or a bank that messed up someone's credit. He is a very calm, collected, and intelligent man. This situation happened when I was just a baby. When my sister was about 14, she's 13 years older than me. Anyway, she was coming home from volleyball practice one day, and there was a construction on the street we lived in. One of the construction workers started whistling and calling her cutie and babe in far more vulgar ways, and started walking towards her. Sis started walking faster, but he caught up and tried to grab her, so she dropped her backpack and ran home. When she got there, she told my mom and dad about it. My mom said dad spent some 5 minutes making sure my sister was okay, then told mom, "Stay here taking care of her. I'll be right back." So he goes out to the street, machete in hand. Dad loves camping, and a machete helps to clear some plants in the wild, ready to turn that into 9 different pieces of